let's talk about how to draw the head. And the goal here is to make it just as simple as we possibly can. And then we're going to do a lot of lessons on this, slowly build up. But if you were with me before or seen some of my other lessons, you'll know that my goal with as much as I can, every mark I make is make it as simple as I can. If it's a shape, make it a simple shape. If it's a three-dimensional structure, make it a three-dimensional structure. That's what we're going to do today. Make it as simple as we can and at the same time as characteristic as possible. So if I had to stop there, it would get the idea across really well. If I just make it simple, there's my head, there's my features, there's my costume. If I make it too simple, it's not very characteristic, and then I have to almost start completely over. Some ways that gets in the way of doing a really well-positioned, well-proportioned, well-designed head. So I want to make it super simple and yet super characteristic. Those two things are at odds. So if we look at this beautiful Michelangelo, we'll see that head is beautifully, it's a little stylized because it's in the manner of our wonderful old friend here, but it's very, very characteristic, and it's done with a lot of detail. We want to try and make it very, very characteristic right in the beginning. So if we had more time, we would refine the idea, but we still get across the idea as quickly as possible. A beautiful young woman or one young man. This was actually a young man posing as a young woman, showing us what he or she looks like. Here's a photograph, of course. How can we get this down on the page? That's what we're going to work on today. As simply as we can, as characteristically as we can. So I'm going to give you a trick I use that I think will help. And the trick is to get it simple and characteristic as a shape, which means two-dimensional. But if we have greater aspirations, as you and I do, we'll probably move towards a three-dimensional, give or take our sensibilities, our style we work with, and our investment in the craft. So we're going to look at three-dimensional form. It's harder than two-dimensional shape. Two-dimensional shape is that shadow on the wall. Three-dimensional form is we start to feel around the volume. We start to feel it break the picture plane. We start to feel the nose come off the face, those kind of things. And we define that, or I define that, as not just moving the viewer's eye around the form, that's a silhouette, that's flat. But more importantly, the movement has to move over the form. And that means it has to show us how to get from one side to the other over the top of the silhouette. And when we do that correctly, we'll feel both the character with that mark, dramatic pause here, or that shadow shape, simply designed or beautifully rendered, either one. We will feel both its character, it's round across, it's not convoluted, it's not square, it's not boxy. Its character, more of its character. We know it's round in silhouette. Now we know it's round in volume too. It's not fluted like a column. It's not chiseled like a box. It's rounded and smooth, character and its position. Now we feel a little underneath this form. So we're going to learn how to do that. We're going to take that two-dimensional idea and make it a three-dimensional idea before we ever add the render detail that takes care of it for us if we do it right. But if we just kind of unconsciously render away until it looks right, we can make it look right. It'll look fantastic, in fact. It'll take us 100 hours to get there. And when something's wrong, we won't quite know when it's wrong, why it's wrong. And we can't stylize it. We can't make it anything other than what it is and what everybody else sees, more or less. And so our beautiful crafted work will look very much like, and sometimes exactly like, if we're in the school of a certain style, exactly like everybody else who uses that same process. So I have higher aspirations for myself, and as you might wish or not, but if you do wish, higher aspirations for you. So we're going to learn how to get control of this, understand the ideas behind it, because if we get the ideas up in our head, up in our mind, then if we choose, we can change our mind, change our idea, and that will change our style. So it looks like my world that you're stepping into visually when you look into that frame, or Michelangelo's, whoops, that's not the window I wanted. Michelangelo's world, very particular world that's a little or a lot different than the real world in a wonderful way. And that invites us into this fantasy world, which is all art. All art is a fantasy world. It may or may not be a fantasy in story, but in structure, this is just as fantastic as those wizards going down into the dungeon or whatever they were doing. So we want to get really clear on our ideas, get control over them, and then we can play with them creatively, and wonderful things happen. So let's see how that works. We want to start simple because otherwise it gets a little overwhelming. So if I were to look at a figure, well, not a figure, a head, because we're going to look at heads for the next several sessions. If I were to look at a head, and let's see here, let me grab, saw it in a profile. Let me adjust this a little bit so I can be a little more organized. There we go. We'll start with a profile for a reason you'll see in a little bit. If we look at the profile, we can see there's a skull shape and a face shape, all the features, the hair, maybe some costuming, a hat, a ring in the ear, a high collar to the shirt or whatever. But it's going to have a certain series of shapes. The two basic shapes, you won't be surprised to hear, two biggest, simplest shapes is the shape of the skull and the shape, or oftentimes we think of it as a mask of the face, like so. And we can think of those in all sorts of different ways. We can make it more chiseled in design. We can combine it into one structure. We can make it ultra simple. We can make it very, very characteristic by really detailing that out. An atelier style might do a chiseled logic, slightly simplified, but worked out in main right away. All the major silhouettes of hair and ear and everything carefully measured and constructed so that it all gives the ring of truth, of accuracy, of realism, of copying right away. And we quickly know if that simplified eye socket and nose is feeling like this young man's eye socket and nose, or it's a little off. So we'd simplify and structure it again, and a little close to the ear. So we'd move it and simplify and structure again, and so on. All sorts of possibilities there. What I'm primarily interested in, though, is what I think of as LTL. We'll just call it a little idea, or actually it's a little set of ideas, 3 ideas. So whatever simplified structure I decide to use, and I'm going to break down the skull shape, or sometimes instead of the skull shape, the hairstyle, but we'll just stick with the skull shape. So we'll just go back to what I did in the very beginning. Let's actually make that a little lighter. So I can start out very simple and quite characteristic for the skull under the hair, or as I said, it could be the hairstyle, but I like to get down to the base of it so I can connect things. I want all my simple ideas, all my simple shapes or forms. If I'm more sophisticated, all of my gestures, the energy as opposed to the matter of things, to be connecting. That I consider our number one job. So this LTL is going to help us connect all our structures together. So if I imagine a simplification of this particular head, it's just a profile. And it has a face that goes down. I'll just make it this simple mask. And a skull that goes back. I'll just make it that simple egg. If I were to put that into a box, actually, as I'm doing here, or visually, as I might just eyeball it, I should have, on average, the average head, or as Robert Beverly Hale called it, the ideal head. He said every great artist has an ideal figure, and he compares all of the figures in the world that he might be drawing, this particular gentleman, to that ideal figure. And I'll show you what that is for me. And then your job will be to come up with your own ideal figure over time. You can use mine or anybody else's for now as a stand-in. That's absolutely fine. But eventually you'll come up with your own version of what the ideal is. And then everybody out there will either conform to that, and then you'll be a powerful stylist where we recognize your style because everybody looks like your figures. Everybody looks like a Michelangelo and not a photograph, for example, or a Raphael, or a Katie Kovitz, or Egon Schiele, or whoever. So, or you can then take that ideal figure as a canon of beauty, or just as a measuring point, and say, okay, well, this person that I want to capture as a portrait, very realistic, varies from my ideal this much. So that's going to be our goal here, and we'll see how far we get today. But I want my ideal, because on average this is usually true, the vertical dimension of the face with a little bit of skull to be a little longer than the horizontal dimension of the skull ending with the front of the face and without the features. This is without the forehead and the nose and the barrel of the mouth and the chin. Those will all build out a little or a lot, give or take the character or your idealization of all characters. We'll bump out a little bit or a lot. We'll do that another time. But I want it to be a little bit longer than it is wide. And I will decide over time and by circumstance how much longer that is. So my ideal figure has more length and less width by a little bit. My ideal figure has the mask of the face ending perfectly, or almost, it's almost perfectly, right in the middle of that egg shape for the skull, that ellipse for the skull. And my ideal figure has an ear that starts right at that central line, right where the mask of the face ends. So oftentimes I do this to the mask. I make a line that's vertical, or sometimes I'll lay it back a little bit. And I put the ear right there. And this should equal that. And you can see this is too much and this is too little. So my ideal would be here, even though that particular figure, the ear is much closer to the back of the head. Now, it's not a perfect profile, but we can vary it. So anyway, that's going to be where I'm looking to. Half here, like that. That's the basic proportions. That's all I need for now. I need a very simple yet characteristic shape for the skull, a very simple yet characteristic shape for the skull. I could put the whole thing into one simple yet characteristic. Now, this is not quite as characteristic. It has a pointy back of the skull, and it has a pointy corner where the forehead turns up into the hairline, or more or less. And it has kind of a sharp, pointy, slightly witchy, cartoon witch chin. So it's not quite characteristic, but I could chisel or round those off very quickly and it'd be pretty good. And then again, I'd want that same. So this should be a little less. They should be a little bit more. And so on. If I can make it very simple, now I've got control over placing it in space. If I really make it super characteristic, meaning more and more rendered, if it's in the wrong position, I'm in big trouble. Now I realize as I draw this simple yet characteristic shape, and notice I drew it 3 times trying to get it right. And maybe that's the best, maybe that's the best, maybe this was the best choice. Take my pick. But I'll draw it several times, one after the other, until I get it just right. Simple but characteristic in shape and proportion. And then once I get a good rhythm, I've built my craft skills enough that I can get the simple shape. This is still flat, mind you. I haven't made it sculptural. We haven't moved over the form and volume yet. It's still flat on the paper, flat on the wall like a silhouette. Once I get the shape and the proportion, 2 different ideas. Notice I worked on the shape first, and then I started working on the proportions. Shape first, then the proportions. And you could, I suppose, do it the reverse if you wanted to. You could get the proportions right and then make more characteristic shapes. But shape and proportion, 1 idea, 2 ideas. Then I will add the position of that shape that is relatively well proportioned, that it overall is simple yet characteristic in its shape design, in the proportions of length to width, and its position. And when I look at that position, I realize that he's looking down a little bit. Let's do this here, actually. We actually have a figure, a pose where the head is looking down, like so, or down, like so, or I could do both, like so. And now it's a little more characteristic. This is closer. You can see if I bring this right up against the forehead, forehead looks pretty well vertical, doesn't it? Forehead, the contour of the forehead is pretty vertical, but then we bounce around there. It's real hard to see. So what I do notice is the forehead is more forward facing and the chin is farther back. The beginning of the face is closer to us, and the beginning of the face is closer, not to us, to the left. And the bottom of the face at the chin is closer to the right. So it drops down. And I could close one eye and hold my pencil up to that reference or that model and get the tilt right away and bring it right to take my pencil and eyeball, one eye closed, eyeball it, get the tilt, get that established. And now we have a more characteristic, not just shape, not just proportions, but also the position. And we could keep adding on top of that. We could stack the value range, the shadow shape on the big shape, the three-dimensional form on the two-dimensional shape silhouette, the lesser structures of the features on the bigger landscape of the body, or of the face and skull, and so on. So that's going to be my process, and I'll do this a bunch. And if I can get this down really well, then I can start being more successful with my reference or more successful with my imagination. So these are old illustrations I actually did for Disney 30, 40 years ago, probably 35 years ago. And you can see all these are very simple constructions, but you can feel with our character here, with that sweeping tail of a hood, we get that same kind of L shape. We get the drift down, the chin slightly up. We can see with this big giant of a guy, his face is tilting forward and we're slightly on top of it. Whereas this other kind of more evil looking fellow with the goatee and the sharp eyebrows, we know he's got to be a villain. That's more perfect profile and in flatter perspective. So now we can start adding our third dimension here. We got two dimensions, length and width. Now we can add depth. And I think we'll just leave that there. So now I can get the simple two-dimensional idea. I always start with the simplest possible idea for me, or not necessarily the simplest possible, but the simplest comfortable idea. What am I comfortable with? What can I take on and not feel overwhelmed and not feel like I am going to screw it up or almost always do screw it up? What gives me the best chance for success? So I'm going to draw it like this. And what I love to get in corners a lot. I try and add in lots of curves and lots of corners. Curves gives me that life. It feels like it's not mechanical. This is too mechanical. This is too mechanical. It's all straights. And the good thing about that is we know when we screw something up. We know when it needs to be adjusted somehow. So that's helpful for accuracy. Straights and corners, because we can align things in parallel or in recession, diminishing towards a point. And corners are fantastic because they're perfect landmarks. Chin ends here. Hairline, let's say, or where the skull meets the skull face, or the face meets the hairstyle, whatever. We get a clear corner. We can always round it off like a carpenter, sand it down. But if we get a clear corner, we have a landmark and we can measure. What is this equal? So I love corners. Straights, though, get very mechanical, even though they're easier to draw because there's only one direction, whereas a curve is constantly, forever changing directions. It's evolving, but that's what life does. So if I can draw curves, it's going to have more life. If it's going to have corners, it's going to have more accuracy of proportion and position because I can measure and I can plot. This corner is farther to the right of this corner. But if I use corners with the curves, I get the best of both. So I can still draw something that's very boxy without ever to do my linear perspective, if I know how to do that, or my intuitive perspective, if that's good enough. That's almost always what I use. And I can still make corrections of proportion and position and so on, but without ever drawing a straight line, but just getting corners between the curves. So I try and get as many curves that last as long as possible, and a corner between curves when the curves change dramatically, radically, or significantly in direction. And if I'm not sure what significant is, I just put a corner there and I can always round it off later. Corners and curves. It's my secret sauce. It brings beautiful structure, dimension, and the curves bring beautiful life. This shows the matter. This shows the energy. Best of both worlds. That's what life is. It's solidity in action, in evolving position, evolving character, evolving personality, evolving value ranges. That evolution of is all summed up with a curve. So I'll start with that, curves and corners, and then I'll start to get more and more characteristic. Maybe I'll come in then and put that skull shape so I get rid of this. And maybe mask shape, and this gets pretty close to the jawline. Do a simplified hairline. Get the ear in there. And then I can keep evolving. Well, shoot, that's tilted too far forward. Should be a little less forward. So I'll adjust it and begin again. But now it gives me ways to build and ways to critique. Is it curved enough? Does it feel fluid enough? Or is it getting too architectural? Is it enough corners, or is it getting too rubbery and too wandering? We never quite know when one thing ends and the other begins. We can judge by that. And then here's what we're going to do. Here's where the LTL comes in. If we think of the skull going back, and the face coming down, we can get his proportion and position, simple character, but that is created by an L. Might be an upside down tipped over L, might be a reverse L, but it's an L. And notice it's an L where I never used a straight line. And it's usually an L that's not a perfect right angle. It usually opens up a little bit. The back of the skull is usually a little higher than the front of the skull. It drifts back and up. You'll notice an early man, Australopithecus, it's a big change. The axis going back and the jut of the muzzle. We all have a little bit of a muzzle. They had a little bit more. This is very close to a chimpanzee skull. It's other than the teeth, it's hard to tell the difference oftentimes. But you can see that really opens up. In a human skull, we have it drift forward. Notice how the face drifts forward. Or if we go straight on and imagine the skull having the bottom here. If it's straight forward looking eye to eye, then the back of the skull usually feels a little higher. Not all the time, but most of the time. Feels a little higher than the front of the skull. So make that L open up a little bit from a perfect T, perfect right angle, like a triangle. Should not be perfect. Should be slightly opened, like so. So there's my first L. And that's all we need to do if it's going to be two-dimensional. But if it's going to be three-dimensional, then we're going to take, let's do this now. We're going to take the first L, and we can do these in any order pretty much, but this is usually a convenient order. We'll take that first L, and I'm going to add a T to it. And the T is the natural center line coming right down through. Let's do this real quick. Let's see here. Give me a second to pull this up. That is that's weird. It's very weird. I don't know why that did that, so we'll get rid of that. But I'll show you that in a second. Something went screwy there, and I'm sure it was me. So there's the first L. We'll need two. Now I'm going to get the natural center line, and I'm going to look for it in two convenient points where the eyebrows separate to allow for the nose, and where the forehead goes back before the nose comes out. So if we do a real simple forehead comes out, then goes back in, nose comes out, goes back in. Barrel of the mouth also pushes out. We have a little bit of a muzzle. You notice that Australopithecus had a bigger muzzle than us and a smaller skull, of course. It came way out this way. Really wide open L. But we have a little muzzle, and it comes back to where the chin starts right there. So I look for that point and that point. Those are the narrowest points of the form. Everything else bulges out a little bit or a lot. And this can drift back farther with a sloping skull, of course, but close enough, and we can refine it. I'm looking for that right there. And if it's not a perfect profile, I will see a little bit of the far side, a little bit of the far eyebrow, a little bit of the far eyelashes maybe, a little bit of the natural M. It's not very well drawn, is it? I'll see some of that far side of the lip right here. And in this case, so we're getting a little bit of a profile there. And then I'm going to get the eyebrow line. And I'm going to look at the arching eyebrows, or where the eyebrows begin, or the eyebrows end. I'm looking for that symmetrical other side. I don't have much of an arch, so just kind of curved over, kind of like clown eyebrows, like that, but where the high point is maybe. But some characters have big arches, and usually in dramatic or fantasy work, you can see the arching eyebrow. You can see the two arching eyebrows here on our big character. We'll sketch those in a second. And so I'm going to look for that, and that's almost a perfect profile, or a perfect horizontal right here. There's a T. So I've got an L, and now I've got a T, and now we want another L. So now I'm going to look at the eyebrow line. I'm going to come right back to this one. Oops. good. And come right back to this one. And I'm going to pick this out. In here. And once we have this particular L, something interesting happens. Now, if we were to have symmetrical bangs, darken that. And let's the side sweep of these bangs. They would also run on that. The eyelashes, the two sides, the two corners of the mouth, or the two rises of the lips, the chin. Usually I just get the eyebrow line to the ear, and then I get the eyebrow line and the chin. And what you'll notice is, as you start getting more and more information, you'll get a better and better feel of the proportions and the positions. And so what you might have missed before at a really simple stage, you can start seeing, well, shoot, I made it too tilted over again. And I made the mask of the face too long. And whoops, that chin isn't going in the right direction. Those of you who know linear perspective know that things vanish to a point. I don't worry about that. I make them parallel or close to it, because they will get rounded off in the rendering unless you're super stylized. And we just pick that out. And then I'll realize, shoot, this is doing this, and this is really much lower. It's almost perfectly in line. The L almost disappears. So that's too extreme. But what I'll usually do is I'll tilt, if it's tilting, I'll tilt it a little too much. If I'm on top of it, I'll be on top of it too much. I'll exaggerate the perspective. And then once we start to get a feel for this, then we can start seeing the box logic of that perspective idea, all these alignments here. And then the more things we start to add in, the more characteristic it will be, but also the more ways to measure. And then we can adjust things and make them more accurate and refine things. And every little thing will track. And when we start getting more and more stuff, we'll go, shoot, nose is too big. Got to shorten it. And we'll make, whoops, now that's too short. And as we get more and more things to compare, not just the eyebrow, the eyeball, or eye socket, we can start to plot that out carefully and get more accurate. So in the beginning, when I'm learning this, I don't want to try and get it just right. It's too many things to worry about. This is just me. It might drive you crazy if it's not just right. I want to get it accurate to what I see or more. I want to get the idea exactly right, whatever I deem that to be. And I could be measuring mechanically to do it with calipers or whatever, or checking the tilt. I want to get the idea or a greater, more dynamic version of the idea. So I always know I'm going to screw up. If I can screw up in the right way, it won't feel like a screw up. And if I can screw up consistently, it'll feel like my style. So I'm going to err to the more dynamic. If it's tilting, I'll tilt it more. If we're a little on top of it, I'll get a little more on top of it. If the shadows are dark, I'll make them a little darker yet, and so on, into the more dynamic. Push it towards that idea. I'd rather have a much funnier joke, a much scarier movie if it's a horror film. That's a better mistake to make, and usually people don't even see it as a mistake. They see it as better than real life. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Michelangelo here. And see what we can see. And then we're kind of running a little late. You guys are running late. It's not my fault. So now if we look at this, let's look at the L. The skull goes back and up. The face comes down and in, very much like our reference we had. In this case, the skull, you can see the ghost of the skull here. The skull is a little deeper than the chin is wide, and with the hair, it's much more so. So a little deeper than it is wide. And then I can pick out the mask of the face now, or I can start building the mask of the face by the LTL, my choice. I'll usually draw fairly light to make sure I can change it, because it's almost certainly going to want to be evolved a little bit. So there's the L. Now I'm going to do the T. I'm going to do the eyebrow line, and I check it and notice that the forehead is in such a position, the whole face is in such a position that the far side of the face, the left side for us, is higher and the right side is lower. So if we could imagine the ears, wherever they're at, they would be higher too on a glass head. And everything's going to track that. But all we care about is getting the eyebrow, and then notice this is not higher, it's horizontal, lower. Who would have thought? I wouldn't have thought that looking at it. And now everything, let's make that a little bit stronger. Everything is doing the same thing. Notice how the hairstyle follows that. So if I simplify, we have a little bit of a widow's peak there. And this gets a little soft. This rounds, of course, a little more characteristic if I round that corner. And notice that this rounding is higher than this rounding of tone. Notice how it's also going that way, and then this just tones out. Everything is going to follow this. Notice how the eyebrows kind of bump around, but in symmetry to what's going on the other side. And the shadow follows suit. Notice that the eye socket here would be, can't see it, would be higher over here, but the nose hides it. Notice that the eyelid follows that same, lids really, follow that same construction logic. Notice that the tip of the nose and the wing, it curves, but the wing of the nose also follows that same or similar. Notice that the upper lip, before it turns off into the corner of the mouth, then he has to add that pouty shape so it doesn't feel like it's too smiley. Mine's a little too smiley. Lower lip, same thing. Pouty little part of the mouth, same thing. Front of the chin, same thing. Jawline, digastric plane, same thing. On and on and on. This alignment here even is picked up with where the cheek shadow ends in alignment. None of that is a mistake. Look at the pouty shadow. Every detail is constructed on that same box logic, that same thinking there. So if we can understand it at the big stage, when we decide, choose to pick up the detail, it will track with the same concept, same thinking. Okay, so eventually we can add all the structures, all the detail, and we'll do these in a way that all these little things have structures, just like all the big things have structures. And the features on that landscape will be in the same perspective as the landscape of the head itself, landscape of the face itself. It will all track along. So we're going to stop there because we've gone a little long. But I hope that gives you some good thinking. We'll continue this next week and explore the L, the T. Let me try that again. I can do better than that. Give me a second chance here, guys, please. The T and the other L. We do that, and we've got everything we need to construct a box in three-dimensional space. We know how it's leaning side to side. We know how it's facing with the T, and we know how it's tilting in or out of the paper with the other L. L leaning, T facing, other L tipping. 3 dimensions. Once we've got that, everything can be blocked out structurally in square or rounder terms. And that's what we're aiming for. And that will be true with all the features. All the features. That will be true with all the tones on the features. They will all track along that same constructed 3-dimensional roadmap that we plot out. That simple yet characteristic thinking that we can refine into ever more and ever more realization until it becomes super photorealistic, if that's what we want.